Hello, this is Steve Bonacontri from Angular Orange giving you an Angular tutorial on Shadow DOM. This is part of our routing course. It's a very small section. We'll get through it very quickly. I just want to give you an idea of the web component standard called Shadow DOM, how it's used, and what you should know about it when building Angular applications. Okay. So like I said, Shadow DOM is part of the Web Components standard. Every web page is represented as a tree of DOM objects, and Shadow DOM allows you to encapsulate a subtree of HTML elements to create a boundary between one component and another. How does it do this? Well, it introduces a namespace within that subtree so your component template can have its own styles that don't clash with the main application. Okay, Shadow DOM subtree is rendered as part of an HTML document, but its elements are not part of the main DOM tree. Or at least that's the way it appears. Okay, so the namespacing introduces that additional namespace that takes that subtree and makes it so that it's not part of the main DOM. The Shadow DOM places a wall between the DOM content and the internals of the component. The CSS styles of the custom component will not be merged with the main DOM CSS. Okay, so why do we do this? It prevents possible conflicts in rendering styles. Okay, but what you're going to find is it is also a little bit confusing, and when you introduce this view encapsulation object within Angular and you define different Shadow DOM modes using the view encapsulation mode, you'll find that it does get a little confusing and things start behaving differently and it's hard to understand. So we're going to clear up that for you and show you a little bit about how you could understand it better. Okay, so Shadow DOM modes, there's 3 of them. By default, the view encapsulation mode is emulated, but let's go through them. The view encapsulation is an object that comes out of the core package, and you don't need to set it, you don't need to get it, you don't need to use it within the application because by default, the view encapsulation mode is emulated. But if you were to get it, you could basically define the mode to be native, none, or emulated, and you could play it with your application a little bit and find out how the styles are affected. So we're going to go through that, just show you very simply what happens. And needless to say, things are changing and don't expect everything to be stable, but expect similar behavior in the future and things to change a little bit within the different browsers as they try to support different things, different view encapsulation modes, but as long as you understand the basic concepts, you'll be able to inspect the elements and understand what's happening. Okay, so the native view encapsulation mode uses the Shadow DOM that is natively supported by the browser. HTML and styles are not merged with the DOM of the web page. That is, the styles of the component are not added to the head section of the page, but the styles of the component and its parent are encapsulated inside the component. Okay, really what's happening here is each browser has to implement the native mode the way they want to, but it has to support the standard component architecture. So loosely speaking, what you'll see is these browsers doing it a little bit differently, but it has to do the same thing. And that is, it's not going to take the component styles and merge them up with the head section of the main page. Okay, view encapsulation of none does not use Shadow DOM encapsulation. All the markup and styles will be integrated into the global web page DOM. The host selector will not work in this mode. There is no Shadow DOM. Okay, so basically what this means is, let's suppose I have some styles in the header of my index.html file, and I want those styles to be used throughout my component tree within my Angular app. I'm going to simply do just that. I'm going to put some styles in the index.html. I'm going to use them throughout all the components in my tree. Not a realistic situation. but you'll find that it can be done. And I think of this mode when I say, oh, okay, I want to use Bootstrap and I want to use all those styles for my whole component tree consistently. I might try to use view encapsulation as none, but if I were to use material design with an Angular and I want my cards layouts to be different for one child component versus the parent component, yeah, I'm not going to want this view encapsulation mode. I'm going to want a native or emulated mode so I could use my own styles within my own component. But anyway, with that said, the none also makes a reference to this host selector will not work in this mode. There is no shadow DOM, and the host selector is used when there's shadow DOM to reference a container, the containing object. So we'll go through that later on in a course. Okay, then there's a view encapsulation mode called emulated. This is the default mode. It emulates the encapsulation of the shadow DOM. This instructs the Angular to generate unique attributes for the styles of the component and will not merge the styles with the styles of the web page's DOM. Okay, so the way I interpret this is, okay, I don't care what you do. Emulate it. Give me a namespace for my app component and its styles so they don't clash with the main application. Do that, emulated, and maybe that'll be consistent across Internet Explorer and Chrome and everything. Or I could use the native mode and let them do what they think should be done for that native browser for different reasons. But anyway, by default, the view encapsulation's emulated. And this prevents a clashing of the styles. Okay, so now let's take a look at the code sample. Okay, so basically what I did is I created a code sample, and I called it Shadow DOM. And what I did was I went into WebStorm, I created a new project. It's using Angular CLI. I called it Shadow DOM. So this Angular CLI file was created, and it has the name of the project, Shadow DOM, and it has the directory name where my application resides. Defines the root directory, the build directory, an index.html, a main TypeScript driver file. It defines other things like the test file, the styles of the index.html. So it defines other name value pairs like the configuration for end-to-end test using Protractor and the lint configuration and things like that. But let's not get too much involved in that. What we want to do is we want to take a look at Shadow DOM. So first, let's focus on these two. Okay, so you have an index.html file, and you have a main.ts driver. Okay, so let's look at those two first. You have an index.html, and this is driving the web application, and there's an app root element which is pointing to our root component in Angular. This is, Angular is a tree of components, and this is the root component starting with this particular element. So if I want to travel down the tree to look at the markup, I'd have to look at the root component, go to its markup fragment, its template, see if there's any child elements there, look at those templates. I'd have to understand what's happening. Okay, so notice also there's a style sheet associated with the index.html. These styles are viewed as the web application styles. They're going to get pushed up to the header section. When you inspect elements within the browser, you'll see that these styles get pushed up to the header of the file, and then the component templates and their styles would either be namespaced using Shadow DOM, or they will be pushed up to the header section and after these styles, so they could overwrite styles. So it does get confusing, and you have to understand it a little bit. Okay, so let's look at the main driver for TypeScript. Okay, this imports several objects from packages and some from files. Okay, the first thing it imports is enable prod mode from the Angular core package, and that's used to call enable prod mode to turn off assertions if you're rolling this application out into production. The environment variable points to whether it's production or not. In this case, it might be false, and so this won't be called. So we'll get some assertions in development mode. There's a platform browser dynamic, which gets imported from the platform browser dynamic package under Angular, and it's used to bootstrap our application using our app module. Every Angular application has an app module. It's bootstrapped with platform browser dynamic, and that's what this driver is doing, booting up our module. Okay, so let's take a look at what else here. What is app module? Well, it's in this file. It's our custom app module. So let's go take a look at that file. Our app module basically is defined with an ng module annotation. We import platform browser. From that package, we import a browser module. We import an ng module for the annotations. We import our app component from our app component file. And since that app component is getting bootstrapped, that app component is our root component for our Angular application. And then, of course, we define a class called app module, and we export it so it can be seen in other modules. But if you look at the ng module, you declare your custom components, you import your modules you're using. You might have a provider which gets injected into a constructor, like some sort of service. We don't have any right now. And then we also point to our bootstrapped app component. Okay, so next thing we look at is our app component. Our app component imports component for the annotation to define our component, and a view encapsulation object to define our encapsulation mode. Okay, so any class can be any class like this one can be turned into a component by adding a component annotation, and that associates it with a template, a style sheet, encapsulation mode, and also it defines the selector, and that's the selector we saw in the index.html file. Okay, and I also put a little attribute in here, a title, which we're going to render in the front end template, and I'm defining the view encapsulation mode to be emulated, which is the default. Okay, so let's just quickly see what we have here. Okay, we do have a template which just renders the title attribute in my component using the double curly brackets, which is referred to as interpolation. It's an expression language which would render the real-time value. It binds the value title in the component to the template. And then we have a style sheet. And this is the style sheet for the component. It looks a lot like the style sheet for my index.html, but I changed colors and stuff. So basically what I want to do is first show you what the application looks like in Internet Explorer. The blue is coming out of the style sheet from index.html. The div tag is part of the Angular application. It's yellow. The h1 tag is part of the Angular component template, which is an h1 tag, and it's some sort of Coral color. And then if I show you this in Chrome, we see the same thing. Okay, so let's go back to the code. The background is light coral color for the template, and the div tag is yellow. In my index styles, which is this file here, I colored them a little bit different. I have the body is the deep sky blue, but the h1 tag is orange, and the div tag is green. So basically what happened when I rendered the application, and of course, I went to the command line and did an npm space start, and that ran the command line, the Angular CLI command ng space serve. It's running a server, and basically when I go to localhost 4200, the server is going to dynamically, it's going to use WebSockets to change, re-render the front end whenever I change anything in the project. So I could change the styles or the encapsulation mode, and the front end will change. Okay, so let's take a look and see what happened. First of all, let's do this. Let's inspect the element. Let's inspect, and let's see what's happened here. Okay, notice my app root, which is my Angular app. Notice when I put my pointer over it, shows me where it starts. My div, and this is my h1 tag. Now notice the h1 tag, it's sort of like namespaced. There's this underscore ng content -c0 that's somehow in my Angular application, namespaced throughout my Angular application, and that thing is saying, hey, guess what? This isn't part of the DOM. This is the shadow DOM tree, and basically use the styles of the component to style this component. And that's why if you look at the styles to the right, you'll see certain things happened here, and like I said, it's hard to understand what's happening, but if you go to the head, basically what you'll see is what you would see is there's a style. This style's in the header, and basically what you'll see is that you could look at the styles, and you see the one that was in the index file, and then what you would see is another set of styles which sort of got merged, or let's say is overriding those styles, and that one is namespaced. So it's not really overriding them, it's just defining a new set of styles for a new namespaced DOM tree here. Okay, so let's get out of here for a moment, and let's go back to the code, and let's see what'll happen is if we change this. Okay, so let's go to the component. So that was emulated mode. Let's change this to none. And let's see what happens with our application. Now I have to question what's happening here and whether this stuff worked properly. Okay, so my h1 tag doesn't have any namespace indicators, so it's just an h1. So what happened? How come the styles didn't really change? So here's my h1. Background color is orange, and I expected some of these things to change color. You know, that's because I don't know really what's happening. Oh, but look what happened here. The styles now overwrote, redefine the styles. That's interesting. So basically, although I have an h1 or div tag here which is green, I now have a div tag here which is yellow. So it looks like my component style was shoved up here in the header, and so the colors still apply. Okay, now, but imagine how confusing this will get when you have a whole tree of components with different styles and everything. What's happening here? It's troubling. But anyway, just to show you a little bit more, let's go to back to the code, and let's take a look at something here. Let's suppose I didn't color this. Oh, look what happened here. Interesting. So what happened is the H1 color, background color, was not available on the component. So it reached up to the index.html styles and it colored it using the H1 background color for H1. And the reason why it did that, let's try to find out why, is because there was no color background in this H1, so it basically started using this color. But like I said, this could get very confusing, and we're going to be building large-scale applications with hundreds of components, and we want to be able to control it. And not only that, even if I build a component template with one component, which I style perfectly, if I give it to you, you have to use my styles. It's going to be a complicated component. So you need control. You need some control over what you're doing when you deliver reusable components. Now I'm just messing with colors here, but let's take a look at a different example here. Let's see. This H1 has a certain size. This H1 has the same size. This div tag height is 200. This div is 200. Let's do a little bit of playing around. So let's go back to the code. Now let's get rid of this div tag. This was yellow. Yeah, I guess this is good enough. Okay, and so what happened now is the div tag the div tag attributes were not defined in the component, so it used the parent's div tag. Now it just so happens my div tag is the same height, different color, but imagine what would happen if the height and the width were different and everything else. It would pretty much be a train wreck. And then, like I said, once you inspect the element, you could basically see different things associated with the styles and the name spacing of the tags. Okay, so and then I guess I didn't show one mode, which really wouldn't be too much different. That we saw the emulated mode, we saw the none mode. Let's take a look at native mode. And what I was looking for here, which I'm probably not going to find because I just went through this example, was see, things operated a little bit differently in this particular scenario. So what exactly happened? Let's inspect this element. First of all, let's see whether yeah, both Chrome and Microsoft they render different things. Let's go back to Chrome. They did render different things. So see, I wanted to show you this because there's different issues that could happen here. Now I'm like struggling trying to figure out what happens. So who's doing the native mode properly? Is it Google? Is it Microsoft? It's very hard to tell. So let's just take a look and see what happened here. So when I inspect this element, the native mode did not namespace this guy, but it introduced this pound shadow root. And that's very interesting. So basically, the native mode for Chrome, it introduced another shadow root node. So in this case, it really is not part of the DOM tree. It's a totally different node, and basically, it rendered properly inside of Chrome. Now let's see why this didn't work in IE, and if we can't figure out, we'll just call it a day. But let's do that. Okay, so Microsoft, gee, I don't get it. Let me see if I can inspect an element. Well, this is going to be hard. But basically, if you look under, here's the app root. Dear Lord, I can't even see anything under the app root. Okay, this just goes to show what I'm driving at. So in native mode, we don't know where these browsers stand, and so it's hard to use some of these modes because you're going to be working with different browsers, and you don't want to go through these issues. Emulated. Okay, so that's really what we wanted to show you. So basically, you either leave this line out or use emulated. Emulated will definitely work in IE because basically, if you want to look at what happened here, it introduced this namespace. It emulated for us. And basically what it did is say, hey, I'm not going to trust the browser's native mode. Let's emulate it so it definitely works, and here it is. And that's basically what it did. It introduced this namespace. So we've been using emulated mode for a while now, and when all the browsers support everything correctly with the web component standard, we will take it from there. Okay, anyway, thank you for joining, and that's the end of our tutorial.